Cool.
Welcome to the bonus episode with Jill Sessa. Jill is a 6'2" generator living in Costa Rica. It is not an island. Everything feels like an island to me. And a 6'2" and a 5'1" can change the world together. We're here to change the world together.
Love it. Let's do
And
it.
we are going to do it. And I love that a little bit of magic happened when we met because I only know one other person in Costa Rica, and you happen to know her as well.
Yeah.
Is it like a tiny community there where people just happen to know each other? Like, what are the odds of
Yeah.
that?
Costa Rica is interesting coming from the United States because it's like the size of West Virginia. There's 5 million people that live in all of Costa Rica, and 2.5 million of them live around like the greater metropolitan area of San Jose. So like picture, any state with a big city, there's two big cities in all of Costa Rica and a whole lot of small ones. I've been told there's between like 11 and 14 microclimates. So, it's extremely varied. And so a lot of people live around the city, which has like cooler weather, valleys, that kind of a thing. And then the rest of us are scattered throughout beaches and mountain communities and rivers and all sorts of gorgeous places. And I live at the beach. You are getting to witness a little Costa Rica. You're probably hearing the cicadas and all of that. I live in a very small community. Like, I think there's 147 of us. And I'm between two larger beach communities, and one of them is Samara. And that's where Katie has been living. She's actually getting ready to leave for an adventure herself, but that's how I know her, is she lives in this beautiful beach community to our south, which is like a old school surfer town. I've heard it being described as the black hole of happiness at the end of the road, because the paved road, literally, it got paved to the end where this town is. My roads still are not paved. We're surrounded by 13 kilometers of unpaved roads. So it makes for fun times around here.
And there's must be a lot of retreat centers around where you're at as well, then.
Yeah, I joke around that I can basically throw a stone and find other retreat centers, but that's okay because the environment really is conducive for it. People come here to vacation, they come here to play, they come here to explore, and then to be able to come here and be on retreat, like really nest and rest and dive into a space, it's really very ideal.
Mm. I'm a wet kitchens person, so I've been told that Costa Rica would be a great environment for me. And when I talked with Katie, I think we had like 4 different rains that came in on our podcast.
It's rainy season. It happens to be like sunny now. You can see it's sunny, but it rained like a torrential, gorgeous downpour all night. And it's one of my favorite parts about like the green, we call green season because like literally everything becomes lush. And we'll get like an afternoon rain some days and then an overnight rain. So it's not like your whole day is washed out by rain, but when the rain comes, you dance in it, because it's like it's mid 80s, maybe high 80s. And we've just come through 5 months of dry season. And when those rains hit, it just feels so luscious. It doesn't feel like there's no like onerousness to it. It really feels like relaxing, refreshing. I love it so much.
What's your human design environment? Do you have?
Mountains, interestingly
Mm.
enough, but it's because of needing and wanting perspective,
Hmm.
right? And so for me, what's interesting is I'm sitting next to our magnificent house. It's 6,500 square feet, including a 65-foot ceiling.
Mm.
And so I feel like I'm getting it. But there's also an area of Costa Rica that I love traveling to called Monteverde, Mount Green Mountains. And I say it's the justification for why I still own a pair of jeans and a puffy vest. So if I have like some days off, that's a place I'll go because it is cooler, it gives me a break, and that's where the cloud forests are. So you can literally walk across like hanging bridges surrounding, like you're surrounded by an actual cloud, which is kind of magnificent. So
That is magnificent.
yeah.
So now I'm getting
But I
close.
can't not live by the water. I grew up by the water. I love the water. So I feel like Costa Rica gives me a good balance because it's only hours to any other completely different environment.
Yeah. I didn't realize that it rains as much as Seattle. It rains as much in Seattle as it does in Tennessee when I moved here into East Tennessee.
Mm,
And I'm looking at the Smoky Mountains for my retreat center, and it rains a lot there. So I guess
yeah,
I'm right in the place I'm supposed to be with wet
yeah.
kitchens. The environment's going to be great for me. You can come visit me in the mountains if you want to
I
get
would
to
love
see
it. I
stuff.
love the Smoky Mountains. I've been there a lot.
Yeah, you had said that. When did you find human design and how did it change your life at all,
Mm.
if it did?
in the last few years, as I've spent a lot more time with like a spiritual and conscious community, people were talking about it a lot. So I remember I did my human design profile probably 5 years ago. And at the time, no, it had to have been 6 years ago. And this is important. All my life, my astrology didn't make sense. Like I would read it, my sun made sense. It was my birthday, that was fine. But other aspects of it didn't make sense. Well, I had an opportunity to need my actual birth certificate, and I didn't have like the original because of something that happened in our town. And so we went back, and at this, because I only had like the hospital one you get, with like your cute footprints. And all my life, I was told that I was born in the afternoon, and this was all based on the fact that there was an Islanders game. Okay, so a hockey game. And like all my life, I was told this. So at this time, I had gone to visit my parents, got my real birth certificate, and it showed that I was born at 10:46 p.m. And I turned to them, and I was like, all my life, I was told I was born in the afternoon. You gave me a time, and all of a sudden, my dad was like, it was an evening game. It was a night game. Like, it was just like so funny to them. Like, they had this whole story wrapped around it. So at that time, I started kind of like plotting in all of the places you would put like, your birthplace, your time. I started plotting in, and things shifted just enough with those time changes that like my astrology chart made sense. And then because of like that just kind of clicking, it reminded me, oh, check the human design. And so then I was at a friend's, and she was into it, and just started looking into it. And I'm sure like everybody that's looked into their human design or their gene keys, when those things start to click and you feel heard and seen and found, it just was like, oh, I can relax and breathe. Now, it wasn't like a way to label myself or to like dig in further with it. It was more just like a way to explore and to understand myself better. And so over the last probably 2 or 3 years, I've gotten into a lot more, whereas like I may like read something on it almost every day just because I'm fascinated by it. And we even do things like our hiring and board work and relationship building around human design, just so that we understand one another better.
Yes, I love bringing human design into corporate. I'm a heretic, so I show up and you think you're going to get, people call me lots of things, career coach, life coach. I hear therapist a lot. It's because of my design. It literally says in human design that you are here to bring in a new way of mental healing and bringing spirituality and science back together. The 1718, my favorite personality.
Love that.
And Katie Redford had mentioned the BG5, and I have the gate of deafness of one of the three. I need to hear things multiple times, and I had heard it, and I don't know if you've heard of BG5, but it's essentially the corporate version. It brings it into a corporate language, and it's looking at same thing with pentas with the human design, where it's bringing people together, but we're looking at it from a business sense. These are the skills that you need. And that was a whole new level for me of being seen. I have zero skills that translate into corporate. And I've never tried to work into corporate.
I'm chronically unemployable, so I totally get that.
Yes, I can't wait for people to hear that story in our main episode, because there's a lot of people that are chronically unemployable that need to hear that. I was chronically every 3 years moving to a new place. I'm not here for maintenance mode as a fifth line. And that really made sense. I was a teacher in my first career. I've had many. And then I had an Akashic record, and I've always been a teacher. My mom told my grandfather before he passed, oh, she'll probably be a teacher. She's always been teaching her animals. That's because I was remembering my past life, Mom. Doesn't mean I was going to do that in this lifetime. And you're the natural educator in the world, these 6-2s. Yeah. Where are you educating us to go towards?
So I have probably been educating people. I think the first time I remember was sitting in this tube that they had on my kindergarten playground, and sitting with another girl that was in it, and just teaching her to be calm and okay with herself. Like this was, I have a vivid memory of being with this person, and I've been doing it literally my whole life. I started teaching fitness in my teens, got very deep into the fitness world for decades, and then I had to make a transition and had been really diving into the online world, but from a place of like heart-centered people and heart-centered entrepreneurs. And that's really now continued into what I'm calling the middle third of my life, I hit 50, and as this Costa Rica adventure started. And so I think that at this point, it's really using all of the lessons that I have brought all of my life to everything that I've taught. And it's, showing people the depths within returning to themselves, returning to that deep place of safety inside of themselves, and returning home and remembering. So it's not that we all need more learning. We've got so much YouTube University that we can go to at any time, right? But we all need more remembering. And so that's really the place that I come from, and allowing people to be comfortable with focusing on what they do best, what lights them up, what they're great at, and being okay with other people taking on the other stuff. That we don't have to, master everything, but we can really, truly be masters in those places. And then everything else shows up that we need to once we allow that to happen. And so that's really, it's been my focus for probably the last 15 years, or a lifetime, I'm sure. And I continue to find the way to refine that in the retreat space.
Less learning, more remembering. I've
Yeah.
written that down. I will be sharing that with people. What are your channels and your human design that you have defined?
Oh, this is like, I am somebody that always needs to look at a chart. So
Sorry, I'm catching you off guard. I was just
yeah,
curious.
that's okay. So I could pull up my
Yeah.
chart.
Um,
Some things that I find that I pay attention to, the ones that like really feel, is that like my not self is frustration, right? And so catching myself in that and really bringing a heightened awareness to how I communicate with others when I'm in that frustrated mode. Sacral authority. So like really being good with the gut feelings, right? And I think I spent a lot of time thinking in the shoulds in my previous life. And so now just really trusting myself. So those are probably the areas I focus mostly on. My natural gift is obviously sharing and talking. And so it's easy for me to communicate with people, and I'm very logical. So when I combine all of those things, what makes me a natural born teacher is that I can break things down for people into smaller human sized bites, but also with understanding where they're going, where they need to go, and what they need to understand.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I ask about the channels because I've been looking at the different four different energies. I only have empowerment and logic.
Mm,
And when you look at the 26 traits or the planets, I have 3 support, 3 abstract. I really am very much in the empowerment logic. And
mm,
as we were going through that in the BG5 class, they were talking about being very selfish in these energies with empowerment, because there's the self-empowerment energy, there's empowerment energy and centering, and then there's empowerment knowing. And I have all but the 20 gate 20 in the self-empowerment. And she said, I'd like you to think of being selfish as being more self-light.
mm-hmm.
And that was like fireworks for me in the brain of my, because she's telling me my whole childhood, I've been told you need to think of others. You're a little bit more, you're too selfish, you're too bossy. I have
Yeah.
gate 3410. It's the gate of conviction. I am very, and I've learned over the years that my conviction really just needs to be about staying true to myself. It doesn't
Mm,
need to be about an opinion. That's the gate of
yes.
17. Um, but what I find so interesting about how I move through the world with that energy is there's still people that say, well, you need to step into those energies. Well, no, I don't.
You don't need to do anything.
Not only is it and like the world would be a better place is sort of the way that they're describing it. The world would be at a better place if you did. And I'm like, but the problem with love your neighbor as yourself is that you don't love yourself. And so you do love your neighbor as yourself, and you're an asshole to yourself. So you're an
Right.
asshole to your neighbor. And so I'm here to be a living example of what it looks like to put
Yeah.
yourself first. I'm
Mm-hmm.
also an only child. So I live with someone
Mm,
who doesn't have any support energy either. He has more traits than I do, but when I don't remember to put the mustard on the table was the example I use. Like I'll grab all the condiments that I like and I won't
mhm.
think about, if it's
Yes.
late at night and I have to consciously think about the tribe. It's not part of my natural
Mhm.
body's way of movement. I'm also a gut and sacral. And when he sets the table, will bring every condiment that you would never even need, because he grew up with five other kids in his family. The youngest is six. You know, his
You never
conditioning.
knew when you were going to need it or who would
Right.
request
His
it.
conditioning was, you know, he's so self-empowered that he's thinking about, he actually doesn't have the self-empowerment one. He has other empowerment. He's empowerment knowing. But it's funny, like we'll have hamburgers and like sour creams on the table because he'll bring every condiment out. And really what we're here when we really own our energies and stay in our energies is that we're showing people how to be not something they're not, but just who they are.
Yeah.
I'm not an asshole. But you know, when he says things like, you never got taught to push in your chair. I have been told my whole life to push in my chair. But
Mm.
my 6124 is an individual empowerment way that my brain thinks. And
Your
that's
encyclopedic referencing of your chart is interesting and impressive to me because that is absolutely not something that I have the ability for. Never have, like, to remember these things. But I'm also somebody that lives completely in feeling and gut, right? So, what's interesting to me is that as I have been on this path, becoming more individualistic is actually an important part for me, right? And so the different names that are for like a 6-2 generator, one of them is hermit, right? But another one is exemplary human. And when I first heard that one, I guffawed. I mean, like out loud, burst, probably like spit out whatever I was drinking because it seems like a highfalutin name or title, right? But instead, what I've now realized, it's just be an example of being human.
yeah.
Be an example of being okay with yourself. Be an example of being okay with your flaws and understanding them and being a work in progress. And like that shift for me has been really paramount to this kind of, as I said, the middle third of my life. I take a lot of mushrooms, both medicinal and psychedelic. And so I feel like living to 143 is quite possible. So that's why I call it the middle third of my life. But this idea that just simply living from like a really solid, grounded place with a deep understanding of yourself gives other people permission to do the same.
It does. It does. My very dear friend, when I took the first and only time I've taken mushrooms and got the grippy socks, she's a 6-2 projector. And she simply has always just lived as herself. She loves working in her corporate job as her HR business partner. And because of that, everyone around me was saying, don't tell anyone that happened to you. Oh, like everyone, the embarrassment, the shame that you're going to naturally feel. And she was the person that was like, I've worked in a hospital in HR. And she was the one that was ready to just be that example of you are great. You just had a moment. Like, you're so needed. You know, being so naturally self-empowered is so needed. And that gave me almost permission to just return to self.
Yes.
And yeah, the 34, you mentioned encyclopedia. So I can do that for everybody's chart too.
It's amazing.
And you don't think of these things as talent, but here's what happens when you have 10 empowerment energies, 10 logic energies, and then you get stuck with just 3 abstract. And my abstract is in my unusualness. Totally makes sense. Once I've seen it, I can really go deep into it. And I can remember it for people. I don't know how I do that.
That's incredible.
But knowing the 34 for me is in my culture. So I block my own prosperity and the 34 is the one that has the conviction. It's the one that's very self-absorbed by its nature because it's our process. And when we allow people to be in their process and we don't want them to be anything they're not.
Yeah.
This is why I always joke I get kicked out of all the tribes I've ever been in, like Christian church, like every church I've been in, like starting with Sunday school. Just simply me asking what page are we on to the girl next to me, and then they just didn't want to tell me what page we were on. So
I don't get kicked out. I end up like wanting to join tribes and communities. I call myself a seeker, and then I just drift out because something is no longer keeping my attention. It doesn't like that's I don't need that great.
Yeah, you drift because you're the exemplary human. I get kicked out because I'm the heretic.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, bye. And so I've collected a wonderful history and of groups and all of these things, but I don't feel the need to like either prove myself to them or to belong to them. I actually feel uncomfortable sometimes when I'm sort of supposed to belong to groups too much.
I tried to prove myself. That was my downfall. I had the open ego. And having the hanging 21 there is my trait of what I'm going to communicate in this lifetime. My Mercury makes sense. It's the authority. I'm going in trying to prove to you that the way you're doing authoritatively, the way you're doing these things is just wrong. What other exemplary human information do you want people to know?
Because of the kind of people that I attract, certainly running a retreat center, but even just living the way that I do, everybody I'm in, like when I say everybody I'm in contact with, I quite literally mean that right now, is on a quote unquote healing journey. And I think coming from a place of operating as someone who is healed and evolving rather than fixed, broken, but recognizing, I often talk about like a spiral staircase that, the staircase is going up, but as we twist around and go up, we're in a different place, but we're looking at the same thing just from a different angle, different aspect. And it's okay to change our perspective. It's okay to have evolved. That doesn't mean we were ever broken in the first place. And so rather than thinking of like, I need to do more healing, it's I am healed and therefore this is my next evolution. This is the next thing I'm exploring. This is the next thing I'm studying, but really deeply being okay. We also don't need to re-traumatize ourselves to heal our trauma. And when we allow ourselves to live in the joy, to live in the contentment, I don't seek happiness, by the way, I seek contentment. Because I think that when we allow ourselves to experience a panoply of like human emotions and everything that could happen with us, we get this like really, really full life. But that doesn't mean that there was ever anything wrong with me and with you, with everybody. And there was a moment in my own healing journey where for instance, I put my scoliosis back into my spine after decades of people trying to fix it and correct it. And I just got this message, like, there was never anything wrong with you. This is just how you were built. They were doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. And that felt so empowering and beautiful and now pain-free for me. But the reaction to it by those who had been part of that journey was that they felt hurt. And being able to reflect with them that they too have evolved, that they too have grown and seen different things. And I am now responsible solely, completely, 100% for my feelings, my reactions, or how I am and how I be in the world. And so this idea that we can operate from the place that we're healed, there will be something else on the journey, but really truly embodying what it is that we were working on, what we were revealing, why we even came to something in our healing journey in the first place, and really allow yourself to enjoy having passed through that rather than looking for the next thing that needs to be fixed. But like, hey, I'm okay. I'm really okay. And when I'm not okay, I've given myself a lot of tools. That includes people, that includes modalities, that includes meditations, whatever it is of those tools that you've given yourself, that you can turn to them more quickly and bring yourself back to that kind of like center point in your journey. And I really would love for people to feel themselves in that healed place, that place of having gone through and I'm good. And not always seeking forward to the next thing that needs to be fixed because we're not at all broken. We're just humans.
Yeah. Sometimes movement forward isn't the goal is a phrase I use a lot for my clients. They're always
great.
looking for what's next.
Yeah. Like really being present. And that includes with ourselves. Because when you're present with another human, deeply present, I mean, magic happens, right? The connections there are really, really incredible. Why not have that connection with ourselves? Be deeply present, be okay with not being in hustle and what's next mode, but really here. It's
Yeah.
taken me years to detox the hustle mode. I'll tell you that. I will tell you that. Living in Costa Rica has been a wonderful teacher of that. And that's not just like our design. That's culture. That's imprinting. That's what's being told to us. But that doesn't mean you're not striving. That doesn't mean you don't have things that you want to accomplish and impact in the world, right? Those are two different things. You can do it with a receiving, with an allowing, with being who you are, rather than the grind and hustle and push. And it's delightful to be in that place. It's much more relaxing.
Now I really want to see your chart because I'm so curious. I I think this is the gift that comes with my self-empowerment energy is that I was never in the hustle. And yet
Mm.
I've still like when I built the gym, I sat in the park. I left my job early. I sat in a park. And um people showed up and then I found a space and then I had a gym. Ooh. Yeah, so you've got that 3410 as well. Do you have the
Look like you just like looked at that like from a screen and you
Yeah,
knew that's a
you have the 10,
gift.
34, 57. Yeah. So you have that too, that intuitive knowing. But you
Mm.
got that first 30 years, you fuck around and find out. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so
Oh, I totally did.
you're part of society from the beginning.
Yeah, totally did.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
And I think that's maybe it's interesting you say that because the selfishness that I often feel is if I compare myself to others and I'm like, well, I'm not really worried about that. But I'm not really worried about that. I have a sixth line pearl too. So the only sixth line I have is in my pearl and it's gate 9, which is focus. And
Mm.
so I've never focused on money, which is really what hustle is. The only sixth line of experience I have is like money is really useful when I need it, but I don't really need to accumulate it.
Mm.
Even explaining to someone who's like, well, I'm a financial advisor and I know what I'm making and when I'm 60. And I'm like, well, people become millionaires at 50. Like,
Yeah.
you're
Why
so
not?
worried about it. Right? Like I'm over here getting such rich experience that by the time I'm 41 now, having a conversation with me is way more valuable because of the experiences I've prioritized, because I've what I've built. And oh, by the way, my business never was in the red and it was supposed
Mhm.
to be a few times. Um, it just worked out.
Yeah.
I didn't really have anything on paper, like no business plan. I just had an idea that people bought into, which is what the 1034 does. It's so beautifully is that people want to follow it.
Oh, awesome.
When you're
Yeah,
and the
I've
57
experienced
is
that.
your intuition. And so intuitively, like when the pandemic hit, I had sold a gym. I was no longer a teacher. I was no longer working for an organization that was about 60% event-based money. Pandemic in New York was a nightmare, like events.
Hmm.
And it was also an inner knowing that I couldn't take that nonprofit organization. I don't have the capacity builder strength in my chart. I didn't know
Mm.
any of that at the time. I just knew that I had tapped out what I was able to grow and I tripled their revenue. So I just always had this inner knowing of I have a ceiling and then other people have to come in after me. No one
Mm.
ever said,
Beautiful.
"Hey, you're not here for maintenance mode." Hey, but then I did the one time when mom died and dad came out of the closet and I had a friend that was a therapist. I got a therapist. And then
It's a
the
good time to
therapist said, "Hey, you don't have to have this pattern."
go. Mm.
And the reality is that but that's my pattern. 3 years feels really good for me. I come
Mhm.
in and I learn, I start to perfect, and then I get it to where it needs to be, and then I need to move out. I'm
Yeah.
really into the in out piece. And so I love where you talk about saying, I am healed, I am evolving. Where her approach was, there's a hole in your sidewalk, and you keep walking around down the same sidewalk,
I love that analogy.
right?
Yeah.
It's a lovely little poem. Like there's a hole in my sidewalk. I've fallen in. I can't get out. And
Mm.
then I finally got out. I walked down the same street. There's a hole in my sidewalk. I fell in, but I got out faster. And then
Mm.
there's a hole in my sidewalk. I see it. I step around it. And then there's no more hole in my sidewalk. I'm on a different sidewalk.
Different sidewalk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
for me, my different sidewalks have also been moving. I've lived in 3 states. I've lived in
Mhm.
multiple cities. And The third time is always a charm has been a phrase I've used. And threes, our brain is wired for threes. Threes are very, the 5-1, I think we all love threes. This is my third state. And I'm like, this is probably the one I will really have roots. I've never felt called to own a home because I've never felt called to stay.
Yeah.
And yet Wet Kitchens is really the not self is shores. It's moving around. But it's allowed me moving neighborhoods is really where I get to meet more strangers. I've maximized my impact of meeting strangers, and now I get to do it virtually. So that empowerment energy you have, I imagine you spent your first 30 years figuring out hustle culture, and then then once you got kicked off your roof, you were like, this is what this culture is about. Okay, got
Yeah, I
it.
got myself sick doing it.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And now you're on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone can head over to our main episode to hear what it's like to build a retreat center in Costa Rica, how you can work with plant medicine. You mentioned living to 143, so we should probably talk about that and
Yeah.
what that entails. And my dad is really into the psychedelics, so he probably would need to learn about how he can come and do a retreat at your center.
Yeah.
So head
Love
over
it.
to our main episode. And for people listening here, where can they connect with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so our website is conesamaniacr.com, conesamaniacr.com. And in the main episode, we'll talk about what that even means, but it's spelled just like it sounds, conesamaniacr.com. And there is a place there that you can click on a button to chat with Jill. And I love for people to schedule those sessions. It's whether it's talking about retreats or if it's just talking about life, it's literally a chance to if something I say intrigues you, please come over and book one of those chats because I love having these kinds of conversations and just opening up people's eyes to their paths.